She smiled as she took her seat in first class, thinking it was just another flight. But when the flight attendant saw her, everything changed. No questions, no warning, just a slap right in front of everyone. What the crew didn't know, the man sitting one row behind her could destroy the entire airline with a single call. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one. Her name was Claire. She boarded the plane quietly, holding her boarding pass like it was something precious. She wasn't nervous, but there was something in her eyes, a kind of awareness, like she knew how quickly things could shift. This was her first time flying in first class, and though the ticket wasn't hers by achievement, it wasn't a gift either. It was a gesture from the man sitting just behind her in 4B, a man the world whispered about but never truly knew. Claire took her seat in 3A by the window. She wore a plain cream sweater, light jeans, and clean white sneakers. No makeup, no jewelry. Her blonde hair was tied in a soft knot behind her neck. She looked like any other woman traveling alone, quiet, unbothered, content. The kind of woman people overlooked, and that was exactly what she was used to. She looked out the window for a while, then slipped her phone from her purse. A new message appeared. Wheels up in 20. Text me when you land. I'll be in the city by then. Love you. It was from Nathan. She smiled softly and typed back a short reply. Already seated. Everything's fine. She didn't mention that Nathan was sitting just one row behind her. That was their agreement. Low profile, no attention, just a simple flight. She tucked the phone away and opened the book in her lap. She hadn't even finished the first paragraph when a sharp voice cut through the quiet. "Excuse me, ma'am," said a woman standing at her side. Claire looked up. The flight attendant wore a perfectly ironed uniform and a name tag that read Ava. Her posture was rigid, her tone professional, but her eyes were sharp, cold. "I'll need to see your boarding pass," Ava said. Claire blinked, confused. "Is something wrong?" "I just need to verify," Ava repeated, her voice louder than necessary. Claire nodded slowly and reached into her purse. She handed the pass over, keeping her voice even. "It's 3A. Ava looked at the ticket, then back at Claire, then at the ticket again. "This is a first-class seat," she said flatly. "Are you traveling with anyone?" Claire's eyebrows lifted. "Number, I'm traveling alone." Ava let out a breath through her nose. "Stand up for a moment, please." "I'm sorry." "Step out of the seat," she said again, this time firmer. "We'll sort this out." Claire stayed seated. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" Ava didn't answer. She didn't even give a warning. She raised her hand and slapped Claire across the face. A hard, echoing crack filled the cabin. Everyone turned. Claire's head jerked to the side. She stared forward, stunned. Her hand slowly moved to her cheek, which now burned with heat. The shock hit before the pain did. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Ava stood over her, lips pressed thin. "I said stand up," she snapped. "You don't belong here." Across the aisle, a man dropped his coffee. A woman gasped, but no one said a word. No one moved, not even the other flight attendants. And in seat 4B, Nathan slowly lowered the newspaper in his lap. He had seen every second of what just happened, and behind the calm in his eyes, there was a silence so dangerous it could break the sky. Claire didn't move. The sting of the slap was still fresh on her cheek, but it wasn't the pain that held her frozen. It was the humiliation. Her eyes burned, not from tears, but from the weight of the silence around her. Everyone had seen it. Every single person in that luxurious first-class cabin, and not one of them had spoken up. Not the man in 2C who hadn't stopped staring. Not the older woman in 1A who quickly turned her head to the window. They all watched, but none of them said a word. Ava remained standing over her, arms crossed now, as if daring her to resist. Her voice had dropped to a hiss. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Claire blinked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I have a valid ticket. I don't care, Ava snapped. You either move now, or I'll call security before takeoff. Claire's chest tightened. Her instincts screamed at her to fight, but she didn't. Not yet. She simply nodded, picked up her purse, and stood. Every move felt heavier than the last. Her pride was crumbling, but she refused to let Ava see it. She started walking down the aisle, past the judging eyes and turned heads, past the crew member pretending to check an overhead bin. No one reached out. No one even looked her in the eye. Seat 18C was empty. Seat 18C was empty. That's where she sat now, back in coach. No one noticed the small buzz in her purse, the soft vibration against her thigh. She took a breath, pulled her phone out, and typed with trembling fingers. She hit me. In front of everyone. I'm in the back now. She hit send. Up in 4B, Nathan felt the vibration in his hand. He opened the message and stared at it for a moment too long. His jaw tightened. He looked up at Ava, who had just returned to the front galley, laughing softly with another crew member like nothing had happened. Nathan didn't speak, didn't flinch. He just took a slow, deep breath and unlocked his phone again. His next move wouldn't be loud. It would be precise. Claire sat stiffly in the narrow seat, the back of her legs barely fitting against the cramped row. Her knees brushed the seat in front of her, a cruel contrast to the spacious first-class seat she had occupied minutes ago. She stared straight ahead, her fingers gripping the armrests. Her cheek still throbbed, not just from the slap, but from the shame that came with it. She had done nothing wrong. She had shown her ticket. She had followed the rules. And still, she had been treated like a trespasser. Around her, economy passengers bustled, boarding, stowing bags, chatting casually. No one knew what had just happened up front. She felt like screaming. Instead, she opened her bag, pulled out her phone, and stared at the screen. One message from Nathan had already come through. What's the flight number? She typed quickly. Flight 717. Why? The reply came almost instantly. Stay put. Don't speak to anyone, I'll handle it. Claire let the phone fall into her lap. The tears she had been holding back still refused to fall. But inside, she was crumbling. Not because of Ava, but because she had sat there like a child and let herself be moved. Because she didn't fight. Back in the first-class galley, Ava sipped from a paper cup and rolled her eyes as she spoke to another attendant, Monica. I swear, the nerve of some people. Did you see the way she just sat there like she belonged? Monica frowned slightly. Her ticket looked valid to me. Ava scoffed. Fake. Probably borrowed, or bought second-hand. You know how it is. First class is for certain people. Not strays. Monica opened her mouth, then closed it again. She'd worked with Ava long enough to know there was no point in arguing when her mind was made up. Meanwhile, Nathan sat quietly in his seat, scrolling through his contacts. His face gave away nothing, but his fingers moved quickly. He placed a call and waited. A deep voice answered on the first ring. Operations. This is Bennett. It's Nathan Hale, he said flatly. There was a pause. Yes, Mr. Hale. How can I assist you? I need you to connect me to flight control. Flight 717. I want cockpit access now. Understood, sir. One moment. Nathan leaned back, eyes closed, the phone still pressed to his ear. Outside, the aircraft was beginning to push back from the gate. Ava didn't know it yet, but her world was about to shift. Hard. The cockpit door buzzed once. Captain Reynolds looked over his shoulder, surprised. They hadn't even taken off yet. Expecting someone? He asked his co-pilot. No, the younger man replied, confused. The door buzzed again. Reynolds pressed the intercom button. Flight deck. A voice responded. Firm, professional, but with a tone that carried weight. Captain, this is Charles Bennett from Ground Operations. We have an urgent communication from Mr. Nathan Hale regarding your flight. Open the cockpit, please. Reynolds blinked. The name registered immediately. Nathan Hale. There wasn't a single airline executive who didn't know that name. He wasn't just rich. He was a majority shareholder in the parent company that owned the airline. The man didn't fly often, but when he did, people noticed. And if he was on this plane, something was very, very wrong. The captain reached over, keyed in the override, and opened the cockpit door. A moment later, the in-flight phone on the control panel lit up with an encrypted call. Bennett's face appeared on the small monitor screen, his expression unreadable. "Captain," he said, "we've been informed of an incident in the first-class cabin. A passenger, Mr. Hale's companion, was allegedly removed from her seat without cause. We need verification before takeoff." Captain Reynolds looked at the seating manifest. "Passenger in 3A, Claire Bennett, moved to economy. Notes say, ticket invalid, flagged by lead flight attendant." "Did anyone verify the ticket with ground staff?" Bennett asked. "No," Reynolds replied slowly. "Not according to protocol logs." Bennett exhaled. "You're to pause taxi. Inform the crew that Ms. Claire Bennett is to be returned to her original seat immediately." The co-pilot glanced over. "We're already cleared for runway push." "Doesn't matter," Bennett said. "Orders are from Mr. Hale. He's sitting in 4B." Reynolds' eyes widened. "He's on the flight?" Bennett nodded once. "You didn't know?" The captain turned pale. "No one told us." "Then now you know," Bennett said sharply. "Fix it, fast, and tell the lead flight attendant. She'll be reporting directly to the executive board upon landing." The screen went dark. Captain Reynolds sat back, stunned. Then he reached for the cabin intercom. "Lead attendant to cockpit. Now." Out in the cabin, Ava stood in the galley, refilling her coffee. She barely reacted when the call came through. But when she stepped into the cockpit and saw the captain's face, her confidence started to crack. Ava stepped into the cockpit with the same posture she always carried. Chin slightly lifted, arms neatly folded behind her back. But the moment she saw the look on Captain Reynolds' face, her steps slowed. The door clicked shut behind her, and for the first time in her long, orderly career, she felt something unfamiliar creeping into her chest. Dread. Captain Reynolds didn't say a word at first. He simply stared at her, as if weighing whether she was worth speaking to. "Would you like to explain," he began, voice low, "why a first-class passenger with a valid boarding pass was removed from her seat without proper verification?" Ava blinked, trying to maintain her tone. "Captain, there was a woman in 3A. She didn't appear to have the correct status, and she didn't respond confidently when asked about her ticket. I made a judgment call to avoid a delay." "Did she resist you?" "Number but. Did she show you a valid boarding pass?" A pause. "Yes. But it didn't make sense. She was alone, didn't fit the profile." Reynolds leaned forward. "Didn't fit the profile." Ava's mouth went dry. "She didn't look like a typical first-class passenger. I thought it was suspicious. I acted quickly to protect the cabin's integrity." "You slapped her," the captain said sharply. That stopped Ava cold. He wasn't asking, he was stating. Ava's eyes widened slightly. "Captain, you struck a passenger. Without cause, without protocol, without checking with crew, ground, or security." He tapped the screen beside him. "That woman's name is Claire Bennett. She had every right to sit in 3A. And do you know who was sitting right behind her?" Ava didn't answer. "Mr. Nathan Hale," the captain said, voice like steel. "You assaulted the girlfriend of the man who owns more of this airline than anyone else on the planet, and you did it in front of a full cabin." All the air seemed to drain from the small room. Ava's legs felt suddenly unsteady. I didn't know," she whispered. "That's the problem," Reynolds said. "You didn't ask. You just acted." He stood from his seat and looked her square in the eye. "You're going to walk back into that cabin in front of every passenger who saw you humiliate her and personally escort Ms. Bennett back to her seat. You will apologize, clearly, audibly, respectfully." Ava stared, frozen. "And when we land," he continued, "you will be met by executive security. Ground ops already have instructions. You're to report to a disciplinary hearing the moment we touch down." Her lips parted, but nothing came out. "I suggest you move," he finished. "Now." Ava turned slowly, opened the cockpit door and stepped back into the cabin. She had walked the aisle of this aircraft hundreds of times, but never like this. Never with shame tightening around her throat like a seatbelt she couldn't unbuckle. And up ahead, far down the aisle in seat 18C, Claire sat in silence, watching the clouds outside the small window, completely unaware that her moment of quiet dignity was about to shift everything. Ava walked down the aisle, her shoes clicking softly against the floor, but to her it sounded deafening. For the first time, the cabin felt longer than it ever had. Every row she passed seemed to stretch further away from her confidence. Eyes followed her now, not with admiration or respect, but with quiet suspicion. Some passengers leaned back just slightly, as if the air had changed, as if they knew something was wrong, even if they hadn't seen what happened. Her palms were sweating, hidden behind the seams of her skirt. Her throat felt dry. She could hear every beat of her heart pulsing in her ears, but she forced her steps to remain steady. She knew exactly where to go. Claire was still in seat 18C, staring out the window with her arms folded across her chest. She hadn't touched her phone in the last several minutes. She hadn't said a word to anyone. From behind, she looked calm, composed, but Ava knew that kind of silence, the kind that burned beneath the skin. She stopped beside the row and cleared her throat. "Miss Bennett." Her voice cracked slightly. She hadn't meant for it to. Claire turned slowly. Her face was unreadable. No anger, no confusion, just a kind of stillness that made Ava feel even smaller. "There's been a misunderstanding," Ava continued, her voice quieter now. "I'd like to escort you back to your original seat." Claire looked at her. Not through her, but at her, her eyes steady, sharp. "Misunderstanding?" she asked, her voice calm, controlled. Ava nodded awkwardly. "Yes, there was an error in verifying your—" "You slapped me," Claire said. Her voice wasn't loud, but the words cut clean through the hum of the cabin. Passengers around them turned. Conversations paused. Ava's face flushed. Yes. I realize now that was a mistaken judgment." "A mistake?" Claire repeated. Ava nodded again, her voice turning into something rehearsed. "I sincerely apologize. I shouldn't have done that. I'd like to correct it now." Claire didn't move. Her hands were still folded, her legs crossed. "And why did you think I didn't belong there in the first place?" she asked quietly. "You didn't check the other passengers' tickets, just mine." Ava's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. "I had the same seat," Claire said. "Same class, same boarding pass. But you only questioned me. Why?" "I misjudged," Ava whispered, barely able to meet her eyes. "That's all I can say." Claire stared at her for a long, heavy second. Then she slowly reached for her bag and stood. Not to cause a scene, not to embarrass her, but because there was power in silence, in dignity, in letting the moment expose itself. As she stepped into the aisle, she paused. "Don't apologize because of who he is," she said, her voice low. "Apologize because of what you did." And with that, she walked back toward the front of the plane. This time, no one looked away. No one pretended not to see. They watched her walk past with a kind of quiet awareness, like something important had just happened, but none of them had the words to describe it. Nathan stood the moment she reached the first-class section. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He simply took her hand and helped her back into her seat. He brushed her cheek gently with his thumb, and she gave him the faintest nod. Ava followed behind, slower now, unsure of where to stand. Claire sat down, placed her bag under the seat again, and adjusted the tray table like nothing had happened. She didn't acknowledge Ava any further. And that silence, that was her answer. Ava turned away and returned to the galley, her footsteps quieter now. Not because she was being polite, but because she was trying not to fall apart. She had thought she controlled the cabin, but now, for the first time in her career, she wasn't in control of anything at all. Back in the galley, Ava leaned against the cold metal counter, her hands gripping the edge like it was the only thing holding her upright. Her breath came in shallow pulls, and for the first time in years, She didn't feel like a senior crew member. She felt like a child being sent to the principal's office. Monica, the junior attendant, stood across from her, arms folded, expression unreadable. She had seen Ava lead dozens of flights, watched her bark orders, enforce policies, and walk with authority. But now that power was slipping off her shoulders like a loose uniform. "You okay?" Monica asked, her voice neutral but firm. Ava didn't answer. Monica leaned in a little. "You know, you didn't even give her a chance." "She didn't look like she belonged up here," Ava mumbled, then immediately regretted saying it. Monica's eyes narrowed slightly. "You didn't mean to say that out loud, did you?" Ava looked away. "It wasn't what I meant. But it's what you thought." The silence that followed was heavier than the pressurized cabin walls around them. Ava turned her back and began organizing juice bottles that didn't need organizing. Her fingers trembled as they touched the tray, and she hated that Monica could probably see it. Meanwhile, in first class, Claire had settled back into her seat. She had accepted the sparkling water the new attendant offered without a word, without even a smile. But her presence had changed. She wasn't hiding anymore. Passengers who once pretended not to notice her were now casting sideways glances, some of guilt, others of curiosity. A man across the aisle, who hadn't said a word since boarding, leaned slightly toward her. "I saw what happened," he said, voice low. "That wasn't right." Claire turned her head. She didn't look angry. She didn't even look surprised. "And yet," she replied softly, "you didn't say anything." The man shifted in his seat. "I didn't think it was my place." She tilted her head. "It was everyone's place." He opened his mouth, but she was already turning away, her words hanging in the air like turbulence. A few rows back, Nathan sat with his arms folded, still silent. His phone vibrated in his lap. He opened it, glanced at the message, and nodded once to himself. The message was from his legal advisor. "Security has been dispatched. The board has already been notified. She'll be met at the gate." Nathan put the phone away and looked over at Claire. "They're handling it," he said quietly. Claire didn't respond. She didn't need to. The way she sat, back straight, eyes forward, was answer enough. At the front of the cabin, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're now cleared for takeoff. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened, tray tables are up, and all electronic devices are in airplane mode." The plane began to taxi down the runway, slowly picking up speed. Passengers adjusted themselves, stewards walked briskly through the aisle, and the roar of the engines grew louder. But beneath it all, one truth pulsed like a second heartbeat. Ava had made a choice. And the moment those wheels lifted off the ground, she had no way of undoing it. The wheels lifted gently off the runway, but inside the cabin, the weight of what had happened still sat heavy in the air. Most of the passengers leaned back, closing their eyes or slipping on headphones. But the tension hadn't disappeared. It had only gotten quieter. Claire sat perfectly still, her hands folded over her lap, her expression unreadable. Her face no longer showed the sting from Ava's slap, but inside, the burn hadn't faded. It wasn't about the physical hit anymore. It was about how quickly someone could judge, humiliate, and dismiss a person based on nothing more than assumption. She glanced at Nathan. He hadn't said much. He didn't need to. The way he looked at her with calm, silent focus told her that his mind was already 5 steps ahead of the situation. Nathan wasn't the type to yell or cause a scene. That wasn't how he operated. He believed in pressure applied precisely, and at the right time. In the galley, Ava stood stiffly behind the curtain, the buzz of the plane dulling out the racing of her thoughts. She had replayed the moment over and over again. The way Claire had looked at her, the passengers watching, the slap she'd delivered without even blinking. In that moment, she had felt justified. She had convinced herself that she was maintaining order, but now all she could feel was dread. She pulled out her tablet and opened the crew app, checking the internal logs and reports for the flight. Her access was still active, for now, but her hands hovered, hesitant. She knew there would be a file waiting for her when they landed. An official notice. A call to report to corporate. Her record, until now clean and respected, would have a permanent blemish. Monica stepped in quietly, holding a tray of drinks. "Want me to take service?" she asked. Ava didn't respond. Monica looked at her for a long moment, then set the tray down. "I used to look up to you," she said finally. Ava turned. "Excuse me?" "I've watched you run flights for years," Monica continued. "You were sharp, precise, unshakable. I always thought, that's what leadership looks like." Ava bristled. "Then maybe you should remember that I've led this crew longer than you've been in the air." "That's exactly why this hurts," Monica replied, her tone even. "Because you knew better." Ava's mouth opened, but she couldn't find the words. Back in first class, a crew member approached Claire quietly. "Miss Bennett," she said gently, "can I offer you anything? We have a special wine menu, or if you'd prefer, something light to eat." Claire glanced at the attendant, then over at Nathan. He gave her a small nod. "I'm fine," she said softly. "But thank you." The attendant lingered a moment. "If you need anything, please let me know." As the attendant turned to leave, Claire's phone vibrated again. She pulled it out and saw the notification. A new email. From corporate@velamairlines.com. Subject, formal apology and internal action. Nathan leaned in slightly. "Open it." Claire tapped the message. Her eyes moved across the screen, scanning quickly. It was a carefully worded letter. The airline acknowledged the incident. They confirmed that the lead flight attendant's actions were being reviewed and that a disciplinary hearing would take place within 48 hours. They promised internal bias training, and they offered Claire a private call with the airline's vice president of guest experience. At the end of the letter were 2 short lines that made her pause. "Your silence in the moment was more powerful than any words. We thank you for reminding us what dignity looks like." Claire let out a slow breath and locked her phone. She stared straight ahead. "I didn't want this," she said after a moment. "I just wanted to sit in my seat and fly." Nathan looked at her carefully. "You still did," he said. "But now the whole plane knows exactly who you are." "And who are you going to be when we land?" she asked, her voice low. He smiled faintly, eyes steady. "Exactly who I've always been. Just a little louder this time." As the plane continued cutting through the clouds, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of meal service. Passengers began to stir, stretch, flip through magazines. But Ava still hadn't moved from the galley. She stood there, frozen in her own thoughts, staring at the beverage cart like it might give her a way out. Because somewhere deep in her gut, she knew. By the time this flight landed, the woman she'd slapped wasn't going to be just a passenger. She was going to be the moment Ava would never be allowed to forget. The cabin had settled into a strange rhythm. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with quiet focus, trays clinking gently as they passed from hand to hand. Passengers spoke in soft voices or not at all. Even the hum of the engines seemed quieter now, like the aircraft itself understood the weight of what was unfolding at 35,000 feet. Claire hadn't touched her drink. She held the glass gently, turning it slowly between her fingers, letting the condensation gather on her skin. Her face looked peaceful to anyone who glanced her way, but behind her calm eyes, thoughts moved rapidly. She kept returning to the moment, the crack of Ava's hand, the sting on her cheek, the silence of everyone around her. That silence had said more than the slap. It had told her that even in first class, even with a paid seat, she was still someone to be questioned, someone to be put back in her place. Across the aisle, the older gentleman who had spoken earlier sat silently. He hadn't said another word since Claire's reply, but now, after clearing his throat, he leaned forward slightly. "Miss," he said softly, "I want to apologize. I should have said something earlier. I didn't." Claire turned her head, eyes calm. He looked down at his hands. "It wasn't that I didn't care. I was just unsure." "Unsure of what?" she asked. "That it was my place to get involved," he admitted. But watching how you handled it, I realize silence is its own kind of choice. Claire didn't speak right away. Then quietly, "It always is." A few rows behind, Nathan tapped his phone. He was no longer exchanging quiet messages with assistants or board members. He had moved past delegation. Now he was preparing. He had already been on the phone with senior executives from Velum Airlines before they boarded. They knew he was flying today. They knew who Claire was. They knew exactly how things were supposed to go. But none of them had expected this. And now Nathan wasn't interested in polite responses or corporate statements. He wanted something permanent, something structural. He opened a document titled Policy Revision Draft. Incident 717. Lines of notes filled the page. New procedures for in-flight accountability. Real-time passenger verification before removals. Escalation reporting that bypassed the crew when necessary. And mandatory ethics retraining for all supervisory flight staff. This wasn't about Claire anymore. Not entirely. This was about the next woman like her. The next man in the back of the plane. The teenager who wouldn't have a Nathan Hale sitting one row behind them. In the galley, Ava stood near the warming trays, staring blankly at the heating indicator lights. Her mind was spinning. She had managed dozens of difficult passengers in her career. Drunk executives, entitled celebrities, arrogant politicians. But she had always known how to keep control. Until today, she kept trying to justify it to herself. Claire looked out of place. She was quiet, unsure. She hesitated. Ava had acted quickly, maybe too quickly, but it had felt right in the moment. Hadn't it? But the moment she remembered Claire's eyes, calm, steady, unimpressed by her apology. That's when she knew. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't protocol. It was her. And now, every time someone passed her in the galley, she imagined they were whispering. She imagined they all knew. Maybe they did. News traveled fast. The co-pilot had barely looked at her when she returned from the cockpit. Monica wouldn't make eye contact. The silence from her own crew was beginning to crush her. She opened the overhead bin and pulled out the passenger manifest again. Her eyes scanned the list, and there it was. Row 3A, Claire Bennett. No asterisk, no red flags. Just a name. Just a woman. Just someone who never should have been touched. At that moment, the intercom crackled. Captain Reynolds' voice came over the speaker, calm and even. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent shortly. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and tray tables returned to the upright position. Thank you for flying with us." Claire fastened her seatbelt, still silent. She glanced out the window. Below, the city skyline was just beginning to take shape, peeking through soft clouds. Nathan leaned forward, his voice low. "They'll be waiting at the gate." She turned to him. "For her?" He nodded once. "And for you." Claire frowned slightly. "I didn't ask for a scene." "You didn't cause one," he said. "She did. All you did was stay in your seat." In the galley, Ava wiped her palms against her skirt and took a long, deep breath. She stared at her reflection in the stainless steel door of the beverage cart. For the first time, she saw someone she didn't recognize. Someone who had power and misused it. And someone who, very soon, was about to lose it all. The descent was smooth, but inside the plane the pressure was rising in ways the cabin couldn't regulate. Seatbelts clicked into place, trays snapped shut, phones slipped quietly into pockets. To most passengers, it was a routine landing. But not for Ava, not for Claire, not for Nathan. From her seat in the galley, Ava watched the seatbelt sign flicker back on and off like a warning light made just for her. Her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't push down anymore. Would they call her into an office the moment she stepped off? Would security be there? Would someone hand her a clipboard and tell her to clear her locker? 10 years. She had given a decade to this airline, missed birthdays, endured red-eye flights and rerouted layovers. She had trained younger crew, earned promotions, learned the faces of executives without ever meeting them. She had believed in the system, believed she was protecting it every time she stood firm with a passenger. But now, she was the problem. She had become the exact kind of headline the company feared. Up front, Claire shifted in her seat, fastening her belt without a word. The city below was in full view now, grids of streets and lights and rooftops growing larger with each passing second. She took one last sip of water and handed the glass back to the crew member quietly. No one in first class dared say anything to her now. They watched her with careful eyes, unsure if they were allowed to look, let alone speak. She had become the center of gravity in the cabin. Nathan glanced at her. "You all right?" She nodded once. "I'm just tired." His voice softened. "They'll try to apologize again to clean it up, just know. You don't owe anyone grace." Claire looked at him. "I'm not doing this for them." He gave her a faint smile, pride behind his eyes. From row 2D, a passenger leaned forward and cleared his throat. He looked to be in his early 50s, wearing a pressed blazer and polished watch. His voice was hesitant. "Miss, I didn't speak earlier, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. And I hope, whatever's waiting when we land, I hope it brings change." Claire didn't smile, but she nodded once. "Thank you." That was all. No lecture, no grand speech. Just a small acknowledgement that silence had its consequences too. The plane finally touched down, tires kissing the runway with a soft bump. A quiet ripple of motion passed through the cabin, passengers straightening, seatbelts loosening, phones lighting up as people reconnected with their normal lives. But not this time. This time, the real story was just beginning. Captain Reynolds's voice came on again. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Riverport International. Please remain seated until we've reached the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off. On behalf of our crew, thank you for flying with us." In the front of the plane, 2 crew members moved discreetly near the door. Ava could see them from the galley. They weren't speaking, just watching. One of them, the purser, held a folder with her name written across the front. And then she saw them. 2 men in dark suits standing just beyond the jet bridge glass. One wore an airport security badge. The other had a lanyard with the airline's logo and a black card that only executive staff carried. Her breath caught in her throat. Claire saw them too. She turned her head slightly, then looked down at her lap. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Nathan checked his watch. "They're early," he muttered. As the plane rolled to a final stop, the ding of the seatbelt sign marked the beginning of what would not be a typical deplaning. The doors opened. A rush of cool airport air slipped into the cabin, and then came the voice. "Ms. Ava Harris?" Ava froze. Her name had never sounded so loud, so final. The suit with the lanyard stepped forward. "Please come with us." Gasps echoed through the cabin. Heads turned. Some passengers whispered, others simply stared. Ava stood slowly, her face pale. Her shoulders, once squared with pride, now sagged with shame. She stepped into the aisle, her eyes catching Claire's for the briefest moment. Claire didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just watched. That was worse. Ava followed the men down the aisle, the same aisle she had walked 100 times with confidence and control. Now, every step felt like a fall. Every row she passed was a reminder that power could vanish in a single moment of cruelty. Passengers leaned away slightly as she passed, giving her space like she was contagious. Like failure could spread. Nathan and Claire remained seated, watching quietly. When Ava disappeared through the jet bridge, the energy in the cabin shifted. Claire stood finally and gathered her things. Nathan stepped beside her. "You ready?" She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "I've been ready since she slapped me." Together they walked toward the door, not with arrogance, not with vengeance, but with the quiet confidence of people who didn't need to raise their voices, because their presence had already said everything that needed to be said. The brightness of the terminal lights hit Ava's eyes as she stepped off the plane, but it wasn't the kind of brightness that warmed or welcomed. It was the kind that exposed. The kind that made you feel like you were standing beneath a spotlight, with no shadows to hide in. She followed the 2 men without protest, Her shoulders were tight, jaw clenched, but her face remained carefully blank. She walked past familiar faces, airport staff she had laughed with during layovers, crew members she had trained years ago, even a ground marshal who once congratulated her for defusing a mid-flight passenger conflict. No one smiled at her now. Some looked away. A few stared. A few already knew. News traveled fast inside terminals. And this wasn't just news. This was a slow-motion collapse. She was led through a side door, one of the executive service passages reserved for high-ranking personnel and high-value clients. But today, it wasn't an honor. Today, it felt like being escorted to judgment. They entered a quiet corridor lined with frosted glass walls and framed awards from decades of airline milestones. At the end of the hall was a small conference room. Inside, 2 people waited, a woman in a navy blazer with the airline's logo embroidered on the chest, and a man in a tailored suit holding a thin folder. They didn't stand to greet her. "Ms. Harris," the man said flatly, gesturing to the chair across from them. "Please have a seat." Ava sat down slowly, folding her hands tightly in her lap. The woman opened the folder and began reading, her voice firm, professional, and utterly without warmth. "This document outlines a summary of the incident on Flight 717. You are being investigated for the unauthorized removal of a verified first-class passenger, the use of excessive force, and a breach of in-flight protocol. The passenger, Claire Bennett, had a confirmed boarding pass and was forcibly relocated without cause or verification." Ava's throat tightened. "I understand what this looks like, but—" The man raised a hand. "This is not a time for explanations, Ms. Harris. This is a time for listening." Ava's mouth closed. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her uniform pants beneath the table. The woman continued. "You were instructed by the captain to return the passenger to her seat and issue a formal apology. You complied, reluctantly. A report from the flight purser states that you used dismissive language even after the fact. Furthermore, security footage from the cabin confirms the passenger's account. You struck her." The man leaned forward. "Let me ask you plainly, do you deny hitting her?" Ava's voice cracked. "Number, I don't deny it." Silence. The woman placed the folder down. "Then you're aware that this incident has already reached the board. Mr. Hale, the majority stakeholder in Velum Airlines, filed a direct complaint, supported by evidence, witness statements, and his own account. He has also requested a formal review of internal crew conduct policies, with your case used as a central example." The man folded his hands. "Do you know what that means, Ms. Harris?" Ava swallowed. "It means I'm being made an example of." "It means," he said, "you reminded the wrong people how easy it is for someone in your position to abuse authority." A long pause followed. Then the woman spoke again, her tone slightly softer, but only slightly. "You're being placed on immediate suspension without pay pending the outcome of the hearing. You are not to enter any Velum Airlines aircraft, terminal, or crew facility until further notice." Ava's lips parted, but no words came. The reality of it sank in slowly, like cold water rising around her ankles. The man stood. "You're dismissed. Security will escort you out." Ava stood numbly. Her legs felt weak, her vision hazy, but she nodded. She walked out of the room in silence, and for the first time in her career, no one followed her with respect. They followed her to make sure she left. In a separate part of the terminal, Claire and Nathan exited the plane to a much different reception. The gate area had cleared, but 2 airline representatives stood waiting for them. A man and woman, both in formal uniforms, expressions tense but respectful. "Ms. Bennett, Mr. Hale," the woman began. "We've arranged for a private escort to the executive lounge. A car will be waiting for you as well. The VP of Guest Relations has requested a conversation at your convenience." Nathan nodded but said nothing. Claire's eyes stayed on the woman. "No press?" she asked quietly. The woman hesitated. "We've kept it internal for now, but stories like this tend to move quickly." Claire sighed. Then let's make sure the right one gets told. They walked through the terminal together, side by side, not speaking. But they didn't need to. Their silence wasn't awkward. It was powerful. Passengers passing by stared. Some recognized Nathan, some didn't. Some looked at Claire like she was someone they'd seen in a courtroom drama or news clip. But few understood what had really just happened. They reached the private lounge. Nathan turned to Claire before they entered. "You sure you're okay?" Claire gave him a tired but steady look. "I'm not broken, Nathan. Just reminded." He nodded, then opened the door for her. Inside, warm lights and quiet music softened the space. Claire sat down slowly, watching the bustle of the terminal through the glass wall in front of her. For the first time since takeoff, she finally exhaled fully. She had been removed from her seat in front of strangers, slapped like a criminal, humiliated without cause, and still, she never once raised her voice. That restraint had shaken the system more than any outburst ever could. Because she didn't need to yell to be heard. She just had to sit back down. And now, the world would watch what happened next. Ava sat on the edge of her bed, still in uniform, her badge removed, her shoulders slouched beneath the crushing silence of her apartment. It had been hours since she was escorted out of the airport. Hours since she turned off her phone, unable to face the avalanche of messages from co-workers, former trainees, and people she used to lead. The blue duffel bag she always carried for back-to-back flights lay untouched by the door, still zipped from the last trip. She hadn't unpacked it. Maybe she never would. The tablet issued by the airline, her digital lifeline to flight schedules, route changes, and crew logs, sat dark and powered off on the nightstand. She hadn't touched it since receiving the suspension notice. She didn't need to. She had seen the look in their eyes during that meeting. This wasn't just suspension, it was the beginning of the end. She walked to the sink and poured a glass of water, her hands shaking slightly. Every sound in her apartment echoed. She hated it. It reminded her that there was no crew here, no safety net, no passengers to instruct, no one to correct. Just her, and the choices she couldn't take back. A soft vibration buzzed on the counter. Her phone. She reached for it, hesitating before turning it over. One new email notification sat on the lock screen. From Claire Bennett. Subject, response to your apology. Her heart caught. She hadn't expected a reply. She wasn't even sure why she had sent the apology earlier that day, shortly after her meeting with corporate. Maybe it was out of guilt, maybe desperation, or maybe, just maybe, it was the first honest thing she had done in a long time. With trembling hands, she opened the message. Claire's email. Ms. Harris, I received your apology. I read it twice. I believe it was sincere. But I need you to understand something. This isn't about what you did to me. It's about what it says about the system you believed you were protecting. You didn't see me as a person that day. You saw something else. Something that didn't fit your idea of who belonged in first class. And instead of asking, instead of checking, you chose to act. Quickly, publicly, violently. That moment told me everything about how much space I'm allowed to take up, even when I've paid for the seat. But here's the truth, Ms. Harris. You didn't knock me down. You exposed yourself. I accept your apology, not because I need it, but because I hope you meant it. And I hope it changes something, not just in you, but in the ones who watched and stayed quiet. Because if no one speaks when things like this happen, it will happen again. And next time, the person in that seat might not have someone like Nathan sitting behind her. Claire Bennett. Ava stared at the screen for a long time. The words didn't sting. They didn't comfort. They sat there like a mirror, cold and honest. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she'd done. Not the consequences, not the suspension, but the moment itself. The casual certainty in her voice when she told Claire to move. The way she hadn't even hesitated. She closed the email and put the phone face down. She didn't cry. There were no tears left. Just silence, and a growing understanding that the career she'd built for 10 years had collapsed in seconds. But maybe, just maybe, this collapse was necessary. because something inside her needed to break before it could ever begin to rebuild. Meanwhile, across the city, in a glass-walled office high above the skyline, Nathan sat at a long table beside 3 senior executives. His phone sat face down next to a legal folder marked Internal Case Review, Flight 717. Claire stood behind him, arms crossed, watching quietly. The head of airline operations leaned forward. "Mr. Hale, we've already suspended Ms. Harris, pending the final hearing. We've also reviewed her record. There's never been an incident before this. Do you still intend to escalate?" Nathan didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Let me be very clear," he said. "I don't care that she had a clean record. This wasn't an error in paperwork. This was a decision, one she made with full control of herself. And if she did it once, she's capable of doing it again." The room went silent. "She didn't just violate protocol," Claire added from behind him. "She violated trust." The executives exchanged glances. Nathan continued. "I want her case included in the next corporate compliance review. I want mandatory empathy and bias training implemented before the quarter ends. And I want the company's public statement to be released by morning. If you don't have a draft ready, I'll write it myself." The CEO, an older man with sharp eyes, nodded slowly. "We understand." "Do you?" Nathan asked. "Because if you don't fix this at the root, it won't just be your staff getting called out, it'll be your brand." Another pause, then, "We'll do what's necessary." "Good," Nathan said. "Because so will I." He stood. Claire followed. They left the conference room together. No security, no press, no announcement. Just the 2 of them walking out, not as a story that needed to be managed, but as a reminder of what happens when people stop staying quiet. Because dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It just refuses to move when it's told it doesn't belong. And sometimes that's what changes everything. The next morning broke with headlines, not just in airline news circles, but in national media, on trending social posts, across forums, podcasts, and talk shows. Passenger removed from first-class Sparks industry-wide review. Flight attendant suspended after assaulting woman. Victim was girlfriend of airline owner. Corporate silence, public outrage. The story behind Flight 717. But Claire Bennett wasn't watching the news. She wasn't reading the comments, the think pieces, or the LinkedIn posts from executives suddenly championing inclusion and accountability. She didn't need the noise. She had lived the story, start to finish. She sat quietly on the back patio of Nathan's townhouse, sipping a hot cup of tea as the early sun crept over the hedges. The city outside was waking up with the usual blur of engines and impatient horns, but in this corner it was still calm. Nathan stepped out behind her, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was quiet, professional. "Yes, move ahead with the second draft of the policy statement. And send a personal copy to Claire before anything goes live." He ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, and sat beside her. "They've approved everything," he said. "Training, oversight changes, employee review channels. They even asked you to speak during the crew retraining summit." Claire raised an eyebrow. "They want me to lecture flight attendants?" "Not lecture," he said. "Remind. Of what power looks like when it's misused. Of what silence looks like when it's accepted." She looked down at her tea, her fingers warming against the ceramic. "I didn't plan for any of this. I didn't even say much." "That's exactly why it worked," Nathan replied. "You didn't turn it into a war. You let them turn it into a mirror." Claire stayed quiet for a moment. "She wrote me again." Ava Nathan glanced over. "What did she say this time?" "She said she's reconsidering everything, that she realized how many times she's acted on instinct and never thought to ask where those instincts came from. She said the silence afterward, mine, the crew's, the passengers, was louder than the slap." Nathan leaned back in his chair. "She's not wrong." Claire looked up at the sky, the blue soft and open above the buildings. "I don't hate her, you know. I think she really thought she was protecting something. But it wasn't the passengers, it wasn't the airline. She was protecting the rules she'd built in her head. Nathan exhaled slowly, and now she's standing in the rubble of them. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the world beyond the walls. In another part of the city, Ava stood outside a glass building, her reflection looking back at her. She hadn't worn her uniform since the day of the incident. It felt wrong now, like it belonged to someone else. She had spent the last 2 days reading everything: Claire's emails, the statement from the airline, public comments from passengers on Flight 717, and a private memo from Vellum's internal culture division, offering her a choice. She could attend the accountability summit and speak about her actions, or she could resign quietly. She had drafted a resignation letter 3 times, but something stopped her. Because if she left now, she'd just vanish. No growth, no confrontation, no change, just silence. Again. And Claire's last words echoed in her mind. "You didn't knock me down. You exposed yourself." She walked inside and signed in for the first day of the internal retraining program. The staff gave her a small nod. No welcome, no judgment, just acknowledgement. She sat in a small circle of 8 others, mostly senior crew members, all waiting for the same presentation. A trainer stepped to the front and introduced the first speaker, Claire Bennett. The room shifted. Claire didn't come in with a clipboard or PowerPoint. She wore a simple blouse and jeans. No makeup, no title, no press. Just presence. She stood in front of the crew, calm, steady. "I'm not here to shame you," she said. "I'm here because one of you saw me and decided I didn't belong." No one moved. "You're taught to manage cabins, control chaos, enforce safety. And that's good. But somewhere in all that training you forgot something important. Your instincts aren't always neutral. Your voice carries authority, and sometimes your assumptions become someone else's trauma." She paused. "I sat in that seat because I earned it. I was removed from it because someone didn't think I looked the part." She never said that out loud, but she didn't have to. That's what assumptions do. They don't need words. They act. Ava couldn't breathe. Claire never looked directly at her, but the words pierced anyway. "And in that moment," Claire continued, "when I was humiliated, I didn't scream. I didn't record. I didn't threaten. I just stayed silent. And that silence did more damage than rage ever could, because it made everyone see what they didn't want to see." She stepped back. "Thank you for listening. I hope you carry this into the next flight you work. Because the next time you look at someone and make a call based on a feeling, ask yourself who taught you to feel that way." She walked out without waiting for applause, and inside that room, Ava finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had done, not because she had been punished, but because someone had taken the time to speak, and still left space for her to listen. The internal summit ended with quiet goodbyes, thoughtful conversations, and a slow reshuffling of habits that would ripple far beyond the room. But for Ava, it was only the beginning of something deeper, something she hadn't experienced in years. Reflection without control. That evening she returned home and opened her laptop, not to scroll news or respond to emails, but to open a blank document. No one asked her to write anything. There was no assignment, no requirement, just a need, raw and real, to unpack what she had spent her entire career ignoring. The words didn't come all at once. They trickled at first. "I've been trained to manage order at 35,000 feet. I've memorized evacuation steps. I've calmed crying babies while sealing emergency doors. I've even de-escalated a drunken brawl mid-flight with nothing but a fire blanket in my voice. But no one trained me to look at my assumptions. No one stopped to ask who I was really protecting when I made snap decisions." She paused, fingers hovering over the keys. "I thought authority meant being respected, but sometimes it just means having the power to humiliate someone and calling it policy." That sentence lingered, and it stayed with her long after the screen dimmed and the room faded to dark. Elsewhere in the city, Claire stepped out of the back of a town car and into the gleaming entrance of Vellum's headquarters. The building stood tall and modern, glass cutting across the skyline like a mirror to the future. Her heels clicked across the marble lobby floor, but she walked like someone who had nothing to prove. This wasn't about recognition anymore. It was about repair. Inside the top-floor boardroom, a new meeting was about to begin. Nathan sat at the head of the table. A large display screen behind him showed a single phrase in bold white letters. Seen, served, respected. It was the title of Vellum's new cabin equity initiative. And Claire? She was no longer just the face of a viral moment. She was now the lead consultant for guest experience reform. The executives filtered in slowly, some curious, others cautious. A few were embarrassed by how recently they had tried to contain the story instead of learning from it. But no one dared pretend now. Claire took her seat beside Nathan, unfolding a slim leather folder filled with policy suggestions, revised protocols, and annotated guest interaction scripts. She began without introduction. "The issue isn't bad employees," she said. "It's unchecked habits. It's who gets the benefit of the doubt, and who gets searched before being believed. It's tone, it's posture. It's how silence is used to reinforce a boundary instead of a bridge." She passed the documents around. No dramatics, no performative outrage, just structure, real change, real accountability. Nathan watched the room. He could see who was receptive, who was defensive, who felt exposed. And Claire, once humiliated in front of a cabin of strangers, now held the attention of people who shaped the future of an entire industry. Across the room, an executive hesitated before raising his hand. "Do you believe the culture in our airline can really shift?" Claire looked at him calmly. "Only if the people who cause harm aren't just punished, but also taught. And only if you're willing to center the experiences of those who were once silenced." The room fell still, not heavy, just quiet in the way truth makes people quiet. 2 weeks later, Flight 186 boarded with a full first-class cabin. The flight crew was different, newer, more aware. Ava wasn't working the flight. She hadn't stepped back into a uniform yet. But she was present. She was on the manifest, as a trainee. Not of aircraft safety, but of passenger humility. As part of her formal remediation, Ava had volunteered, without suggestion or requirement, to shadow the very program she once dismissed. No title, no rank. Just another name on the list of those willing to learn. The new lead flight attendant greeted her with a gentle smile. "Welcome aboard." Ava smiled faintly, tucking her bag beneath the jump seat. "Thank you, I'm ready to listen." And she meant it. She didn't want to control the aisle anymore. She wanted to understand it. That same afternoon, Claire received a letter, handwritten, no return address. But she knew exactly who it was from the moment she saw the neat, careful handwriting. "Claire, thank you for letting your silence teach me, and for letting your voice remind me. I was wrong. Not just in action, but in the way I'd shaped my entire role. I thought keeping order was about removing discomfort. But now I see that sometimes discomfort is exactly what needs to be felt. You gave me that discomfort, and somehow, you also gave me the space to grow from it. If you ever find yourself on one of my flights again, I hope the welcome you receive reflects what I've finally learned to see." Ava Claire folded the letter slowly and set it on the table. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply nodded to herself, as if quietly closing the last page of a long and painful chapter. Because this was never just about being seen. It was about what people did once they finally saw you. And some lessons. They're learned 30,000 feet above the world. But they change everything on the ground. 6 months later, Flight 404 lifted off from the tarmac under a soft golden sky, its engines humming like a quiet promise. The first-class cabin was full, but calm. Passengers tucked in, browsing menus, unwrapping headphones, settling into the plush silence that only people used to comfort understood. In seat 2A, Claire rested her head gently against the leather headrest, eyes closed, not out of exhaustion, but peace. This flight was different, not because of the destination, not even because of the upgrades to service. It was different because of what it represented. Change had come. Not in dramatic waves, not with banners or breaking news, but with slow, precise shifts in policy, training, and mindset. Velum Airlines had launched the Passenger Integrity Initiative, a program centered on respect-first practices, preventative bias audits, and real-time reporting channels. Claire had consulted on every word of it. The airline didn't just fix the surface, they rewrote the foundation. Flight attendants were now required to verify boarding passes only through internal systems, never assumptions. All crew had gone through mandatory empathy sessions, led by actual passengers, some of whom had experienced discrimination in flight. The reporting chain for misconduct no longer ended with a manager. It went straight to an independent ethics board, and the entire industry had taken notice. Other airlines began adopting similar models. Panels were formed. Claire was invited to speak at international aviation conferences, not because she was famous, but because she had proven something many tried to ignore. Dignity travels with you, but not everyone is allowed to carry it equally. Across the aisle, a young woman with nervous eyes glanced at Claire. Her hands fidgeted over her phone, trying to hide her unease. Claire smiled softly and leaned over. "First time in first class?" she asked gently. The girl nodded. "Is it that obvious?" Claire smiled wider. "Not at all. You belong here." The girl let out a small laugh, her shoulders relaxing. At the front of the cabin, a voice came over the speaker. "Good afternoon, everyone. This is your captain speaking. We're now cruising at 35,000 feet. Cabin crew, please begin service." From the front galley, a familiar face appeared. Ava. Her uniform was pressed, her steps calm, her posture different, no longer sharp, no longer rigid. She walked through the aisle not with authority, but with attentiveness. Her eyes met passengers with a kind of open awareness she had never carried before. She reached Claire's row and paused. For a moment, the past stood silently between them. Then Ava spoke. "Ms. Bennett," she said, her voice warm but steady. "It's an honor to have you aboard again. May I get you anything?" Claire looked up at her, not with superiority, not with resentment, but with quiet resolution. "Yes," she said softly. "Can I have some tea, please?" "Absolutely." Ava nodded and stepped away, returning moments later with a porcelain cup and a linen napkin. She placed it on the tray with care, then stood still. "I've read every policy you helped shape," Ava said quietly. "They've changed the way I work, the way I see people. I just wanted you to know. I'm still learning, but I'm not the same." Claire nodded. "Then it was worth everything." Ava gave a small bow of the head and continued down the aisle, serving the next row with the same grace. Claire sipped her tea, letting the warmth settle through her. She glanced out the window. Clouds drifted peacefully beneath them, endless and soft. For a long time she had thought of that slap, of the pain, the silence, the shame. But now it felt far away, like something that had happened to someone else in a different lifetime. What remained wasn't the sound of Ava's hand. It was the sound of no one else saying anything. That was what had stayed with her. But now things were different. Now people were speaking, listening, changing. She looked down at the folded napkin in her lap. On it, scribbled in neat pen, was a small handwritten note. "Thank you for staying in your seat when it would have been easier to walk away." A.H. Claire smiled. For the first time in months, the smile reached her eyes. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers back. And in that whisper is where the world begins to shift. As the plane cruised silently through the sky, she leaned back, took another sip of tea, and finally let herself feel everything she had carried. Without apology, without shame, without asking for permission, she belonged here. And this time, everyone knew it. If this story touched you, give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories.